Welcome in this video on corporate governance. I'd like to introduce a couple of terms that are commonly used in this field and discuss a number of conflicts that can arise. Corporate governance has been narrowly defined as the ways that investors ensure themselves of a decent return on their investment. That is a narrow definition because it focuses solely on the providers of capital, the owners of the firm and the creditors. In another video, I already explained the rights that these investors have and the means that they have to ensure that they get what they are entitled to, depending on the institutional setting that they're embedded in. As I said, this is a narrow definition as it focuses only on the suppliers of capital in the firm. In reality, it's not only the investors who invest something in the firm. Other stakeholders, as we call them, also make investments. If you only think about employees, they invest their time, their effort, their skills in the company, and they also expect a return. More broadly, there's a large number of stakeholders who invest some kind of a thing in the firm. This can be capital, this can be labor, but it can also be, if you think about the community in which a firm is built, it can be a particular location that is made available for the firm. The task of management is to look into all these interests because, after all, everyone who invests something in the firm expects a return. And the system of rights and responsibilities that is constituted by these different stakeholders is then what is referred to as corporate governance in a broader definition. Now, traditionally, some have truly said that you can maximize only on one dimension. So you cannot make everyone super happy all the time. If you only think about the interest of employees and capital, employees would be best off if you make salaries very high, but if you increase wages, then that goes at the expense of profit, so shareholders will be worse off. And there's no possibility that both shareholders and workers would jointly at the same time be the happiest possible version of themselves. So if you want to make someone best off, then you need to pick one. There is no a priori reason, however, why you would prioritize investors over others who make an investment in the firm. You can argue that if you ignore the interest of investors, they won't make funds available and there will be no business at all. But you could similarly argue that if you ignore the interest of employees, then nobody would be willing to work for the firm and all this money that would be invested would be of no use. And for all the primary stakeholders, that is those stakeholders for which the firm is critically dependent, on which it depends for its continued survival. For all these primary stakeholders, if you would ignore them, there would be no firm left. The task of management then is to ensure not that one party is the best off, but that the total of stakeholders is willing to continue to contribute to the organization because they receive a return on what they invest in the company that is perceived as enough. In a seminal paper, Aguilera and Jackson focus on three key stakeholders in the firm. These are, again, the investors, the workers, and the managers of the organization. And they argue that if for two of these groups the interests align, but they are opposing that of the third group, then a common governance conflict arises. You can think of different constellations there that lead to different types of conflicts. If the interest of workers oppose those of the managers and the investors, then we have a class conflict. And you can think of all kinds of Marxist ideas that would fit this perspective. So if investors want to sell off a part of the firm, and managers would be willing to go along, but employees fear that they will be laid off, then that could be perceived to be a class conflict. If managers' interests oppose those of the investors and the workers, we will be talking of a accountability conflict, where managers are not accountable towards the other stakeholders in the firm. This could be the case when, for example, in a particular firm, managers are no longer best placed to take the relevant decisions. So when a manager has reached his best used before date, one could say. Discussions about corruption are a case in point, where managers obtain private benefits to take particular strategic decisions that are not in the interest of the firm. One can also think of cases where the interest of investors oppose those of managers and employees. This would be an insider-outsider conflict. And here there's a lot of talk about foreign investors who go for the quick buck and would destroy the firm if their decisions, their preferred decisions, would go through. So in contrast to the finance perspective, which says that firms should be run with the interest of the shareholders in mind, and that all decisions should be taken to further the interest of the shareholders to maximize the return. The idea is not so much to focus on enlarging a particular piece of pie, but rather to focus on enlarging the pie in itself. In different firms, and also at different points in time, different stakeholders are urgent for the survival of the firm. For example, in human capital intensive firms, the role of labor is much stronger. You would then see that in a firm like this, decisions are more geared towards protecting the interest of workers as compared to those of, for example, managers or investors. In other firms which are more capital intensive, one would imagine that the interest of investors weigh more than those of workers. Different institutional environments, so different industries, different countries, provides different means for investors, managers, and workers to get their right. In some countries, Germanic countries are a case in point, workers have quite far-reaching influence on the strategic direction of the firm. In other countries, that is far less the case, and the voice of employees is much less heard when managers and shareholders decide upon key strategic decisions for the firm. In conclusion, the institutions that exist, so the rights that different stakeholders have, determine the extent to which they have a voice in the boardroom, or the extent to which they have a voice when important decisions are to be made. That shapes the way organizations are structured. It shapes the strategic decisions also that these firms make. And it also shapes the types of activities that firms are active in. So in the end, the institutional environment, the governance constellations, the structure of the organization, as well as the strategies that it pursues, they're all connected.